Right, so greetings, welcome back to the second half of this Philosophy Club on New Year's Day. We've just looked at Thelema, which is lively and interesting, and all these traditions, you know, they could be a whole course, and there are people that do it all in detail. I wanted to start with just sharing my tarot deck, which is, the first card is Osiris, the Egyptian god of resurrection, life and death, and he's the fool in my tarot deck of the gods. Because Osiris was a bit of a fool in that he let himself be killed by Set and chopped into pieces, and then Isis has to go and find the pieces and resurrect him. And that, to me, is a symbol of every man's story. We're all Osiris. We all trust too much. We trust our brother who chops us into pieces. That's the story of humanity in a nutshell. And so Osiris becomes the symbolic fool of the tarot deck in my version. And then you go on to all the other gods. There's 73 of them. And there's Shiva, the ace of fire. So the tarot deck has got 4 suits: earth, air, fire and water. And each god is assigned a different deck. Shiva seems to me definitely a fire god, and he's the ace of fire. And water is an important element, and so the 3 of water is Bacchus here, the ancient Roman god. Tane is the 6 of water, who's the Polynesian god of growth and trees and so on. Manana Machlea is the 9 of water, the ancient god of the sea of the Celtic Druids. And finally Jesus Christ is the 10 of water. So I'm not sure Crowley would have approved of me putting Jesus Christ into my deck, but then hey, they're my tarot. And I think Jesus definitely deserves to be in there, as a son of God or a divine avatar. So we've got Krishna in here as well, and we've got Horus, who's the 9 of fire, Dagda, the king of the earth, the Gaelic Celtic god, and Taranis, who's the local druid god of the white bull, who's the equivalent to Jupiter or Zeus in the Greek and Roman system. So Taranis is the local druid chief god round in this part of La Creuse, which is why we have so many white bulls growing around here. And he's also symbolised by thunder and lightning. So anyway, there's a little glimpse of the tarot, which, so that's my New Year's present to everyone. And if you want a set, you have to get them from me, or you can get the books, 2 volumes, from my publisher. These are like 1,000 pages of text. Go with that. And in a sense, they're an amazing interfaith educational tool, because there's so many gods discussed in great detail and what they symbolise and so on. So if I was still active as head of religious studies in a school, I'd be bringing them out at the beginning of each lesson, and the kids could choose a tarot to start the lesson, and then we'd discuss that god. If any enterprising religious studies teachers out there want to do that, contact me and we'll set that up. Because it's a great way to learn about all different world religions. You've got Allah in the deck, and you've also got Yahweh. Okay, moving on. The next New Religious Movement box is box number 108, which is called Radha Swami, or Sant Mat. And this tradition is very interesting. It's an offshoot of Sikhism, and I encountered it in my trips to India, and also in my academic studies of new religions. And basically the Sikhs, who are beautiful people, they believe that God speaks through all the religions. God speaks through all the teachers and prophets of humanity, including their 10 gurus and the founder, Guru Nanak. It was part of the North Indian or Bhakti movement. called the Sant tradition, which is this North Indian tradition is linked to Sikhism. It's an extremely generous kind of worldview that God speaks through every religion, a bit like the periodic table would argue, and that all the saints and all the avatars of history have some bit of godness in them. What do they have in common is the sound current. And they believe that the Sikh gurus embodied that in particular, and in a definitive form, Guru Nanak, and then the 10 gurus of the Sikh tradition, leading to Guru Gobind Singh, who was the 10th guru, and who then founded the Khalsa, which is the order of Sikhs, for both men and women. All men in the Sikh tradition are called Singh, meaning a lion, because you have to be brave. And all women are called Kaur, that's their surname. That's why in Sikh communities like Southall in London, everyone is a Mr. Singh and a Mrs. Kaur. Kaur means princess, so it's an equalising kind of thing. But that Guru Gobind Singh, he lived in the 1600s and he died, and so Sikhs since then turned to their holy book, which is called the Guru Granth Sahib, which is the great book that was assembled by Guru Gobind Singh, based on the writings of all the 10 gurus that have preceded him, and Guru Nanak. And there are hymns and poetry, also from other saints from the Hindu tradition and from the Muslim tradition of North India, Sufis. It's the most beautiful book, I have it here. And they said, look, we don't, from now on, this is your guru, this book. It's over 1,000 pages. And you can read one passage from it every day. Pious Sikhs will read from it every day. And in fact, at the world headquarters of the Sikh tradition in Amritsar, which I've been to, there's a little island in the middle of this lake in which somebody is reading and reciting from the Guru Granth Sahib all the time. So right now, as I'm speaking, somebody will be there chanting in melodic chant verses from this holy book, which is a sort of perennial philosophy type teaching book. In addition to that, the Sikhs believe that certain sages have become, let's say, more actualized than others. Although we all contain the sound current of God, which is our inmost spiritual heart, some of us don't listen to it and do things that take us astray, or waste our time on addictions to football or sex or money or power, like the idiots that did Brexit. They don't listen to the sound current. They're not infused with divine grace. They're into power politics as a form of harming other people. And so but it's only occasionally that God will speak to a soul. And humility is part of the Sikh tradition. You have to be kind of aware of your both your nobility, your ontological nobility, because we are all children of God, but also our dependence on God, because God is the absolute supreme Lord of the universe. And so we actually ought to behave whilst we're visitors in his palace. That's what the Sikhs say. And anyway, this particular tradition was a tradition of Sikh mystics, and how you can get out of the endless cycles of reincarnation through the power of the Guru, who brings the divine sound current called the Shabd into you. You're given the secret names of God at initiation. And it was Shiv Dayal Singh, or Solmaji Maharaj, who was active in Agra in northern India, which I've been to. Radha Swami means the Lord of Radha, and Radha was the consort of Krishna. The Sikhs took it collectively from Hindus and from Muslims, and nowadays from any other religion. I've met modern day Sikhs who are fully au fait with, most of the traditions I talk about. In Agra, there were two disciples, Pratap Singh and Rai Saligram, who established lineages, and they're associated with a village called Beas, a village on the river Beas, and that's where the Radhaswami colony is, still to this day. Charan Singh, who was the master of this tradition from 1951 to 1990, spread the teachings even further. That was then succeeded by Gurinder Singh. So they do use the Sikh holy book, the Guru Granth Sahib. They have satsangs and so on, but in a sense what they believe is that their guru is a living master. So whereas the Guru Granth Sahib has the teachings of the 10 gurus who died a long time ago, they want a living one who they believe is now inspired with God's word. And they would say to Christians, okay, look, we love Jesus, we've read about him, we've read your Gospels, he's a great guy, but like he's dead, right? Our guy's still alive. You can come and meet him if you want. So they believe it's better to have a living Christ than a guy in a church in the stained glass window on a cross. I know that Christians believe you can contact the spirit of the risen Jesus, but there's no real agreement about how you do that, and how do you know if somebody has a vision of Jesus that's genuine and not just a sort of hallucination. So these Sikhs say it's better to have a living guru, and it's also important for their sociological functioning as a community. I've been to that part of India several times and had many Sikh friends and students, and one of my close friends, Surinder Singh, Surjit Singh, was a member of the Namdari Sikh community, which is very similar to these Radhaswami people. And he arranged for me to go and meet the living guru of that tradition, the Namdari Sikhs, in a village close to Amritsar, and that's when I went to Amritsar. They're amazing people, really humble people. The Sikhs always wear their beards really long. They grow their hair very long. Mine is not long at all, and they grow it to down to their knees. But then they tie it up and put it under a turban, so that it doesn't look silly or too long, And that keeps it clean and protected from the dust, which in northern India's plains is all over the place. And so, they're beautiful people, and the British and the Sikhs always got along very well, and that's why they did fight a couple of wars, which the British won, and then ever since then they've been getting on fine. And lots of Sikhs have gone to live in Britain, in London, where they're very successful in business, and because they believe in hard work, karma yoga. So this tradition, Radhaswami, it's a kind of new religious movement within the Sikh tradition. And the Sikh tradition is, already we mentioned it, but this is a new religious tradition within it. Okay, so that's that one. Fascinating stuff. And I have met some of their practitioners as well as going to the sites. Then we come to the next one, which is New Religious Movements 109. And I've called this eclectic goddess worship because I didn't really know what to call it. It's interesting that a lot of new religious practitioners, they gravitate to the idea of God being divine, female. And I associate this particularly with the hippie movement and the neo-pagan tradition, of which Crowley was a forefather, and some of these others were. The hippie movement in the 60s in California was very much about consciousness raising. I decided on the term eclectic goddess worshippers instead of hippies, because hippies is a controversial term. It has a certain fashion meaning. It's a kind of people that like psychedelics and used to play Grateful Dead, and it has a certain, historical cachet. Whereas I think if you talk about eclectic goddess worshippers, I think it includes hippies, but it extends beyond them, and includes some other more modern traditions. In this tradition, I would include people like Timothy Leary, who was the founding father of psychedelic use, LSD particularly. He was an Irish psychologist at Harvard who felt that, the argument about do you need a living guru, like, no we don't, we've got risen Jesus, but where is he? Can't see him. Or, yeah, we've got our guru, he's down the road on a throne. Timothy Leary would say, well, why don't you find the inner guru? Why don't you resurrect your inner divine consciousness? And here, take this LSD or this psilocybin, and that's going to work. And he studied the use of psychedelics as a psychologist at first. But then he was so excited by its potential that he became a canvasser. He stopped being just an academic and became a practitioner. And that really led to the kind of the hippie mass movement, which was associated with music, the concerts, what do you do is you want to listen to divine music. So groups like the Beatles and so on, Bob Dylan, they became the spokespeople for this new wave of consciousness. People like Jack Kerouac, great novelist of origin in France actually, wrote up the kind of novel On the Road, which is of this period. Ram Dass was the fellow friend of Timothy Leary at Harvard, who went to India and called Richard Alpert, Jewish psychologist, who also was experimenting with LSD and realized its potential for consciousness transformation. And so he went to India to meet his guru and say, like, what do you think of this LSD? Should I use it or not? And the guru said, I'll try it, give me some. And then he took a whole handful and ate it all at once. He shouldn't have done. And then carried on teaching, no difference at all. He was already like as high as you can get naturally. I made that same decision when I was in my hippie phase in the mid-70s. Having read all these people, I thought, that's amazing, I must try this LSD. And it is pretty powerful, But I only did it twice, and I decided I don't want to go down that route. I don't want to be reliant on a pill to find enlightenment. And so I made a decision not to do the drug thing, because I know that people did it too much, and it's not necessary. I mean, in ancient Greece, you only did it twice at the Mysteries of Eleusis. They think that you took a psychedelic potion, the kykeon, and all the greatest philosophers like Plato and Aristotle did this. You had to do it really to become a proper Greek internal explorer, but you didn't keep going back year after year. Once you've done the mysteries, all the mysteries taught you is that there is an immortality of the soul, that the soul is not the same as the body. It inhabits the body temporarily during this life vehicle. It survives after death, and it will come under judgment, which is ultimately its own self-judgment, as Hegel said, but that's why you need to be ethical in your life choices. That's what you learn, during the Eleusis mystery, which is about seeing, the soul's survival after death. And that's what you learn on a good LSD trip. That's what I learned in the 1970s. And once you've learned that, you don't need to keep doing it. It's like, okay, yeah, I get it, right, And then you get on with your life, and you act ethically, and you act righteously. And I got into studying all world religions. I wanted to sort of see what the books said. I had the experience. Now I wanted to confirm it was true. So this tradition did influence me in that respect. Another great intellectual, when I went to San Francisco in much later, in the 90s, I was told that, because I asked them, like, where are the hippies? What's happened to them? Are they still around? This was in a place called Haight-Ashbury in San Francisco, and the guy said, yeah, you should go and read Terence McKenna. He's the leading intellectual of them. And I read him, and he's very brilliant. He argued that the reason we humans grew up and stopped being monkeys and were, bashing each other on the head with stones, is because we discovered psychedelics. And it brought about a huge elevation of consciousness, a sense of love, a sense of sharing. Because what happens on psychedelics is your psyche merges into a general matrix field. you lose the sense of I. You're no longer me, I. You become the we of the universe. You touch the we behind the universe, and we can only call that God, or goddess. And that brings with it all kinds of ethical commitments, like not to harm others, not to rip people off, and so on. And Terence McKenna argued that this is what our ancestors discovered about 40,000 years ago. And he found that in all this primitive Stone Age art, they all appear to be quite stoned, because they've got paintings of, in Africa, they've got paintings of magic mushrooms and things. So our ancestors discovered psychedelics as a soul-revealing tool, psychedelop, meaning to reveal the soul. And so, I thought, this is interesting. I wish I'd met Terence McKenna. In fact, sadly, he died before I got to meet him. But he was close friends with a guy called Fraser Clark, who was like Britain's Timothy Leary. Fraser Clark was a great Scotsman who was from Glasgow, who was our psychedelic Renaissance man, who I met several times. And he ran raves in London in the 80s and 90s, in which people would go and dance and do music and take whatever psychedelic tool they swore by, all strictly without causing trouble, and he would have people coming and giving talks, and it was the connoisseurs psychedelic rave parties of the 80s and 90s in London. I went to some of those and met Fraser, and we became friends, and then he died as well, really sadly. But I inherited some of his library, and he set up a thing called the Parallel University, which kind of merged into the Green University, which I run. So he'd also known R.D. Laing, who was another great psychiatrist and part of this tradition, really. Another friend of ours, a mutual friend, Brian Vision Dance, friend of Fraser Clark, also I knew quite well from that tradition. He was involved with the Stonehenge community. A Jewish guy, but more of a hippie than an Orthodox Jew. He was a Jewish hippie, let's say, and a lovely man. He used to come with me and join me at the Stonehenge all night, kind of festival events that were not allowed to call festivals anymore. And he would give out these little things saying, there's nothing wrong with reality, we're just having a weird conversation. And he was a learned guy. He interviewed me once towards the end of his life. But anyway, and when I was in Jerusalem once, I put a little a paper into the Wailing Wall, a prayer for his soul, because that's what you do if you're Jewish. And that gets him into heaven. So I'm sure I'll see him there. Another part of this tradition is the goddess artist, Monica Sajou, who wrote this wonderful illustrated book called The Great Mother Goddess of All. And she put forward the thesis in the 70s that behind all the religions there's the great goddess. And an initiate is someone that's experienced her, not just read about her or thought about her. And it doesn't mean quite the same as being in love with your girlfriend. It's more like the energy that the girlfriend embodies, the cosmic goddess behind that. So Monica Sajou popularised this idea of the cosmic goddess. And I met her at an event in Stonehenge, which I organised as a druid with my friend George Versoff, some of whose ashes are here in this room, actually. I swore to him I'd take the ashes back to Stonehenge and scatter them, but once we got the pilgrimage centre up and running, if not, anyway, George is in present company. He was very much part of this goddess tradition. He regarded himself as a reborn pagan priest, and supported the work we were doing at Stonehenge to get it open for the pagan community to go on pilgrimage again. I say we need a pilgrimage centre where you can stay overnight, because it's either raining or cold at Stonehenge most of the time. You need a place to go and have a fire and a bit of a party. But Monica was a friend of ours and came to some of the rituals we organised. Another figure is Gordon Wesson from this tradition, who was an expert in pharmacology, magic mushrooms. He went all over Latin America exploring psilocybin and finding shamans that were using these things to get entrance pathways into the psyche. It was him that discovered that at Eleusis in Greece they'd used psychedelics, and he identified what it was they were using, namely an ergo, which is something that grows on rye and produces something like LSD, and that the Greek medicine doctors somehow knew this and were able to create a compound that was powerful enough to give people a serious, trip. So Gordon Wasson was a genius, and he was part of this tradition. I would say Aldous Huxley is also very much part of this tradition. Aldous Huxley was part of the great Huxley family. Thomas Huxley, one of the founders of this tradition, coined the word agnostic to mean I don't know whether there's a God or not. I personally prefer the word gnostic, which means actually I've met him, which is what Jung preferred. And I mean, if you've been to the mysteries, you're a gnostic. Aldous Huxley, I think, was karmically compensating for Thomas Huxley's slight muddling of the issue. And he became very much a Gnostic, and he explored psilocybin and psychedelics, and he wrote about his experiences. One of the first people to chart it, and he wrote a book called The Perennial Philosophy. I mean, he argued, like me, that there is a perennial philosophy behind all religions, but you have to experience it to believe that. You can study around it, and that's great, that's 1,000 PhDs you can do, but you also have to touch it as a living spirit. And so I've met some of the Huxleys myself, relatives, and they're really good people. So I'm putting all this in this list of eclectic goddess worshippers, hippies, and neo-pagans, which is box 109. Okay, and I've added also Albert Hoffman, who, by the way, has just died recently. He was the guy that synthesized LSD. He was a chemist who discovered in Switzerland during World War II. He was exploring different compounds, and he discovered it has this amazing effect. He experienced it, and he realized its potential at the Sandoz laboratories in Switzerland. And it was the Sandoz laboratories that were sending samples to these American psychologists like Ram Dass and Timothy Leary and others in Britain. They're now doing a lot of research in medical fields on the therapeutic effects of psychedelics. They've discovered that people with serious, mental health problems or addictions, alcoholism or something, they can be cured with the proper right dosage and the right, help. And so it's become a feature of certain therapeutic interventions now, and that's being studied in America. There's funding for this, and different universities are doing it. And all they're doing actually is reinventing the mysteries. That's why I think the Greeks managed to stay sane most of the time, because they had that experience of the psychedelic mysteries initiation. And I think a lot of the self-harming behaviour that we see in today's youth, a lot of the suicidal tendencies, a lot of the aggressions, gang violence and the rape and the disrespect of women that we see in certain sectors in young people in the West, I think it comes out of a sense of, well, life's meaningless. I don't know what life is. It's all just random, so I'm just going to fight back. Whereas once you've been to the mysteries, that's not the case. Actually, we're all here for a divine purpose. We're put here by the goddess, Sophia, wisdom, to give her a proper name, the wife of God, and we're supposed to be helping one another and being kind and loving and courteous and polite and helping each other on the journey. And that's why people that have been to the mysteries, they become, exponents of goodness, if they've been to the right mysteries, let's say. And a lot of the people that founded the computer age in California, Stanford University, they were themselves products of that psychedelic revolution, that hippie revolution, including the guy that founded Apple and people that have founded a lot of that high-tech revolution, which is in a sense a manifestation of the metaphysics of interconnectedness. So we're all interconnected. That's what you experience when you go back to source. The high-tech, thing is just a way of manifesting that. Things like Facebook and Instagram and all that. It's just like it's enlightenment for dummies, really. We sages are already plugged into each other's common spiritual fields, and that's what in Christianity we call the communion of saints. It's part of the 39 Articles of the Church of England to believe in the communion of saints. So that's and things like the Facebook are just it's the beginning level of that. It's good though. I mean, I'm not against this. Right. So that's the box 109. And that leads us very neatly to the last of the boxes we'll look at today, which is the next one, 110, which is loosely called New Age. Now, New Age as a religion, gosh, what is it? A new religious movement. It's been around a long time, this term, New Age. I tracked it down to St. John, whose day we just celebrated a couple of days ago. St. John talks about there will come a new age, I think it's in the book of Revelations. I suppose the term is there's something wrong with the age we're living through. There's wars in Ukraine, there's starvation, famine, rape, violence. Every time you turn on the computer, it seems to me that people are killing each other all over the place, random shootings at Christmas or whatever. Well, this can't be right. So we need a new age. It's a sort of cry for something better. And we feel that we deserve something better. Because we all sense, especially if you've been to the mysteries, that there is this divine spark inside us all, which is immortal. And what on earth is going on this planet? Why people aren't behaving properly? So, as a term, it was around in the 18th century when people were looking at things like Freemasonry and the Rosicrucian orders. They were talking about a new order. Benjamin Franklin talked about this. He was a Grand Master Mason. America was founded to help bring that into being. Hence, it's put on the Great Seal of America that a new order shall begin. There was this idea that history can begin again. We can choose the path of righteousness. We can choose what is good. We don't have to just follow the old scripts that eternally condemn us to fight with one another. And so in the 19th century, that idea survived. It lived on. People exploring spiritual, psychological things. It was the beginning of new religious studies. People were becoming less dogmatic. So the first chairs of religious studies were set up around that time. And Christians began to talk about maybe there's going to be a second coming of Christ. Maybe it's time he came back. For 2,000 years we've been waiting. The world's going to, hell in a handbasket. So let's clear the decks and let's have the Messiah back, or the Christ in their view. Meanwhile, the Jews had been preparing for their Messiah to come, particularly in Ukraine, tragically, and Poland with their Kabbalistic and Hasidic traditions, where they very, very deeply go into prayer and tikkun, reparation of all past wrongs. They believe it's down to them, the Jews, to make sure the Messiah comes, not just for themselves, but for all humanity, because the Messiah is not just the King of Israel, but the King of the world, and a good king. And so the deeper you pray, the more likely that is to happen. And there were similar ideas around in the Islamic world.